This is the timeline of events for selling your business. And below is an outline of the key milestones for selling your business successfully and their timing. Some explanation of the sub-actions to be taken within each milestone and their timing as well. Let's note quickly, this is an extremely optimum time frame and would require a very well-prepared seller. Highly desirable company, a qualified buyer, and does not include the transition time to ease out of the company post-sale. All in, you can realistically count on a 3 to 5 year time frame for starting to prepare your business for sale, finding a buyer, selling your business, and transitioning completely out of it. That's 3 to 5 years. So let's go. 4 to 6 weeks for preparation. So, what it means is 2 weeks to gather the required information. The intermediary will work with you to gather necessary information and to gain an understanding of the business. Information gathering is typically mostly a seller's responsibility. Another 2 weeks for the intermediary to compile the necessary teaser and confidential information memorandum documents, mostly an intermediary responsibility. And 1 to 2 weeks to review and finalize the representations, the joint responsibility of the seller and the intermediary. Okay, then we move on to 1 to 3 months for soliciting interest from buyers. And the duration is extremely variable. During this time, the intermediary will mostly be talking with prospects, answering questions, feeding more information to the prospects. Much of the effort during this phase is the intermediary working with prospects, trying to figure out who are serious and who are not, filtering and moving them along, making sure that only serious, qualified prospective buyers get to meet and talk with the seller. The last thing you want to do is put yourself in a position where you're meeting one unqualified buyer after another, because what will end up happening is you'll get frustrated and you'll get a little fed up with the system, and you may even want to stop, which is really not a great idea. So it's key that the intermediary that you're working with is bringing you qualified prospective buyers. Now, the seller may be required to provide ad hoc ancillary reports, mostly accounting type data, or answer questions. And this is very much dependent on the kind of business that you have and what industries you're involved in. The seller will be required to meet with prospective buyers, typically one-on-one. Duration and frequency is variable and will be based on the seriousness of a buyer and the comfort of the seller. Do you feel good with this person? Do you feel that there's some kind of an opportunity here to move the conversation along and at some point potentially actually transition the business to this individual? Next, you're going to receive a letter of intent, an LOI, to proceed. And the prospective buyer will issue the LOI. The seller will be required to negotiate and accept the LOI terms. Review by seller's legal counsel is absolutely mandatory. And as we said before, your legal counsel needs to have experience with selling businesses. The typical LOI would contain terms about the deal, payment schedules, vendor notes, and post-transaction employment and contracts. But it can have all kinds of terms and considerations that will form the basic terms of the future transaction. Accepting an LOI is certainly a significant go, no-go point in the process. The seller gets to make the final determination at this stage. Further on in the program, there will be examples of LOIs that you can look at and help you to understand a more deeper explanation of what an LOI is and the role it plays within the transition process. 2 to 4 months for the buyer due diligence process, and this is a fairly intense period of time. The buyer will provide a list of expected items that they wish to review. Now, again, further on in the course, we have supplied a very, very detailed due diligence process series of questions that you will likely get, and probably more than you'll get from a typical buyer. So as you move along through the Sell Your Business for More program, you're going to be extremely well prepared for all these kinds of requirements. Again, this is just a high-level overview of aspects of transitioning the business or selling the business. Next, the seller will need to work diligently and expeditiously to respond and provide this information in a timely manner. And frankly, if you've taken the course and you've done the things that we're recommending, this won't be a problem. You'll already have all these things in place. Responses could be piecemeal over a few weeks. This for most sellers is the hardest part of the work required, since there could be considerable asks, lots of documents to gather and create, and lots of meetings to review and discuss. Once again, you will ideally already be prepared for this, so this should not be as much of a challenge for you. Depending on the answers to the above, there could be further requests, conversations, and meetings. The intermediary will assist you during this period, but this is largely dependent on the information request and what role the seller would like the intermediary to play, and what access to information would be provided to the intermediary. They can only do what they can do, and they can only work with the documents that you're willing to give them and the information you're willing to give them. And, if you talk to some other folks who've sold businesses, there's all kinds of sellers out there who are extremely reluctant to give over the information that clearly a buyer wants to have. And sometimes it's just because they don't want the buyer to understand what's below the surface in terms of perhaps challenges of the company. 4 to 6 weeks for the legal process and the time required to read and review documents. Legal begins once due diligence completes, and this typically lasts 4 to 6 weeks or more. The variability depends on the legal complexity and detailed seller and buyer review of clauses and specific wording. And if you've ever done contracts, God, anything is possible here. Emotions will be running high at this point, so patience is required if you really want to close a deal. Deal done. Total elapsed time from start to end, 8 to 12 months, but most of the seller effort was during the due diligence phase. So, here are some exercise questions. What would be your ideal timeline for starting the process to completely exit with you having no further involvement with the business? So, question, is it realistic? Why is this your ideal timeline? And what about the above timeline do you think does not fit with your personal situation? What I've given you is an ideal timeline. So, if anything, what's going to happen to you is going to be longer and probably more involved. So you need to think about these questions very, very deeply. You may want to discuss them with your accountant, with your lawyer, anyone else who's on your transition team, and get their feedback. And then you can download the timeline of events notes document, and again, keep everything together in one folder. So complete this lesson and move on.